From Vassar College, this is Conversations at the Salt Line with Wesley Dixon. On this episode, a conversation with Judy Jew.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Conversations at the Salt Line. I am your host, Wesley Dixon, and today I am super happy to have our guest who is a chef, an author, an entrepreneur, and you might know her as an Iron Chef from Iron Chef UK, but please join me in welcoming our guest, Judy Jew. Hi, Judy.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I
Thank you
am.
so much for having me.
You're so welcome. Thank you for being here. We're so happy to get to know you. And Judy is not a Vassar alum, but she said earlier that she has been to Poughkeepsie. She's been to the Poughkeepsie Galleria Mall on Route 9. So she's driven
Yes.
by campus, so she is familiar, which we will take. So thank you for being here, and we're just happy to talk to you.
Thank you.
So I have to ask, I know it's in the middle of the day where you are in the UK, so you've had maybe a couple of meals already. So I have to ask, because you are a foodie, what have you eaten today, and did you cook it yourself?
I did not cook it myself.
Honest.
I did not. I had a matcha latte in the morning, and then for lunch I had to go out, and I went to just a Soho House here. I had a business meeting, and we had we kind of shared. We had some shumai, some pizza, some fried calamari, and a bit of salmon.
Cool. Wow, you've had more than I've had, and it sounds really good. But I do have lunch coming up, so it's giving me some inspiration for what I can have later on in my day. Well, of course, Judy, you've had such an amazing career, and you've done so much. You've been on so many different platforms, and you've shared a lot with the world. But I'm curious to know where it all started. And I know you're in London now, and that's where you are a lot. But you're from New Jersey, so tell me about growing up in Jersey, and tell me what your house was like growing up, particularly related to food.
Oh gosh. I'm a Jersey girl. I was born in Summit, New Jersey, but lived in a small town called Berkeley Heights, which is not too far from Summit. Back then you couldn't buy everything pre-made. So my mom really had to make everything from scratch in order to get that taste of home that she and my dad were craving so much. So there was always something, fermenting, bubbling, drying, cooking, or something going on in our house. We even had this like little garden in the backyard where she grew chilies and perla leaves and even tomatoes and things like this. And, our picnic table used to have like chilies drying out on them in the sun, and in the winter time, remember she used to put them on top of the refrigerator, where the air when it gets like hot, just to, kind of like a dehydrator up there, like impromptu. And in our garage there was like drying seaweed, and in our laundry room was a little bit cooler in there because there wasn't like a lot of heat, but kimchi and, things like that, everything kind of, going on and making everything from scratch. I mean, I have these memories also, everybody kind of relates to like the Crazy Rich Asian scene where everybody's making dumplings.
Right.
And I have memories of that. It wasn't quite as like, like social, I would say. It was more like slave labor. You just had to get all of this meat into some kind of, pastry casing and get it done in any way possible.
Right.
So there was a lot of cooking going on in my household.
That's so cool. When in your childhood or when in your life did H Mart become a thing? Because now I drive from the Hudson Valley to Jersey to go to H Mart and get all of my like prepackaged, pre-seasoned Korean food in particular. But it seems like, of course, that was not an option when you were growing up.
No, there was no H Mart growing up. We had to haul ass to New York City to go to some small little Korean grocery store. There was a kind of an Oriental market nearby us, which was mostly Chinese focused, where my mom could get a few things like Chinese cabbage and a few of her Asian groceries, but nothing Korean specific. And so I remember we would get these massive packages that were sent to us by ship from Korea, full of dried seaweed and dried persimmons and dried chili flakes and gochujang paste and doenjang paste and all kinds of things. It was kind of Yeah, and like dried squid and things that, things that you can obviously just like send from Korea.
Right. The part of your story that you just told that is so interesting to me and resonates with me a lot is that I grew up in South Florida, but my parents are like true Southerners. My mom grew up in rural Mississippi, in the 60s. My
Mm.
dad grew up in rural Kentucky. And so particularly my mom, she's one of 11 siblings. So they were all just like out in the fields, and they were just doing all kinds of like manual labor, particularly around like food, right? And so it's
Mm.
funny because these stories of like these sort of not formalized, but certainly scientific processes of handling food, like much like you said, right? Of like this sort of like makeshift dehydrating of certain things and growing different kind of things in different ways is very
Yeah.
much the oral history I've been given about my mom's childhood in terms of like just doing
Aw.
different cool things in Mississippi with food. And so it's funny because now like I swear to you, we'll have like Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, and like you can certainly buy some of these things like already like prepared in the grocery store, and like that's sacrilegious. Like she refuses. Like no, no, no. We have to like go to the market, get the raw thing. I want to clean it by
Yeah.
hand. There's no pre-cleaned greens, none of that. Like I'm gonna do exactly what I did as I was growing up in Mississippi. I think part of it is nostalgia, and part of it is probably like she doesn't trust whatever process has been commercialized to like clean it for
Absolutely.
her. But it's very
Yeah.
similar to what you said your family was doing growing up. So I can relate to that entirely.
Definitely, definitely. I think it's kind of an immigrant story too, of just trying to always make the food that you yearn so much, in a new land, and having to adapt, and use the local ingredients to get those flavors that you crave and make you feel like you're at home.
Yeah, absolutely. So you went to
Mhm.
school, you studied anything but food in your first sort of post high
Yeah.
school educational experience. Tell me what sort of motivated you to go from your corporate job, your sort of very like buttoned up, straight laced, sort of traditional sort of career to moving into culinary arts.
Yeah, so I mean, I was working. I was an engineering major, and then went into finance, and very much on the corporate ladder and everything. And then I just didn't love what I was doing. It just wasn't for me. I didn't have a passion for it, and I felt, even though I was learning a lot and I was good at what I did, but I'm the type of person that anything I do, I'm just going to give 200%.
Right.
And but I didn't want to read all of the financial journals on the weekends. I didn't want to read the FT. I didn't want to read, Barron's, The Economist, and all this stuff. Like I gravitated towards cookbooks, and back then it was the Zagat Guide,
Right.
and so I was always reading about recipe, like new restaurants and recipes, and what was new and hot on the food scene, and about chefs, and so I kind of just decided that you know this isn't for me, and much to the chagrin of my parents, I quit, and yeah, never looked back, and I enrolled in cooking school. And a lot of people have this journey of like, what is it that they want to do? Like they
Yeah.
know they're unhappy in the current situation, but they're not exactly quite sure what they want to go to. And for me, that journey luckily was very clear. Like I knew I loved food, I knew I loved to cook, I knew I loved eating.
Right.
I loved restaurants, and so I was like, this is what I want to do. And I just was trying to figure out, like how I can be in this food world and carve myself a little bit of a niche in order to, make a career of it.
That's so cool. And so when you embarked on that, of course you studied pastry arts, and I'm curious to know like how that decision was made. Like among, I don't even know what the options are when you're sort of going to
Yeah.
a culinary school, but like,
Yeah.
how did you choose pastry arts in particular as your
Yeah.
area of focus?
So definitely, because it's either one or two routes. You either go into pastry or you go onto the savory side into culinary arts. And it was basically because pastry is actually a lot bigger in my opinion,
Mm,
because you can, I mean, there are people who just do chocolate, there are people who just do cake, there are
right.
people who just do bread, who just do laminated dough or candy, so the world of pastry is much bigger, like
Right.
versus the world of culinary in some degrees,
Okay.
and also I have this engineering background and a very strong science background, and so I just felt the world of pastry just was just calling my name more. And actually pastry to some degree is much harder than the culinary side.
Yeah.
And pastry, it's really scientific, and you have to understand the science behind it, or else it's just going to fall flat, sometimes literally.
Yeah.
If you screw up a cake or something, or you burn it, you have to make the entire thing over. if you screw it up. On the culinary side, on the savory side, you can pretty much fix almost anything.
Right.
You know, like you just keep tasting and you just and you just and you just, you know.
Yeah.
And it's less of a science, I think, on the culinary side, where pastry is 100% a science, you know.
Yeah.
And plus I loved the whole creative part of it. You know, you can spend hours and hours like decorating cakes and
Yeah.
you know, like doing beautiful, like doing like you know, flowers and it's the world was just so much bigger in my point of view. And so I was like, I want to go to school where I can learn the most
Yeah.
and touch as many areas of this discipline across the board. And so that's why I chose pastry. And you'll meet lots of chefs who can cook amazingly, but they can't do pastry.
Right.
Every pastry chef can cook.
I love that.
100%.
It's sort of like when
Mhm.
you were in school and you're learning about geometry and what is it? Every rectangle is square, but every square is a rectangle. It's sort of like that, right? Where like every pastry chef has all the skills and they're sort of, you know, ubiquitous in terms of what they can do, but the others not the other way around. So
Yeah.
I hear you.
Mhm.
So one question I have is a very like regular, non sort of formally culinary educated person is sort of what exactly does it mean to be French trained, right? Because I think it's a big thing that we hear for folks who've gone to certain kinds of culinary school. But I'm curious to know what sort of makes the French style of culinary education distinct from other kinds of culinary education.
I mean, the French kind of repertoire is considered like the foundation of cooking in the West and in the Western world. You know, I guess that their kind of like technique and you know, when it comes to French pastries in particular, I mean, it's French that takes the cake,
Hmm.
literally. You know, no pun intended. And so, just kind of learning like the 3 different sauces and all of these different you know, techniques, and they're just considered the fundamental starting point in culinary cuisine in the Western world. Yeah.
Yeah. And given
Bring it
that,
on.
yeah.
Mhm.
Given that, I am curious if, in your experience in sort of a French culinary education, particularly being someone that comes from a different heritage background, if you sort of could poke holes in sort of this like historical sort of precedent that we put French culinary arts on, right? It's sort of like, you know, at Vassar,
Yeah.
the students are very liberal and always trying to decolonize things. And so I'm curious to know, like,
Yeah.
if in your experience in school and then since, if you've sort of had thoughts about like, why is it that like it's French education? Can there be like Korean culinary education school
Yeah,
that like is super cool?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the French technique is not a technique that I use in my Korean
Mm,
cooking, you know, like the basis of, you know, kind of like one of the basis things is how to make a really good chicken stock or like a cork bouillon or something.
hmm.
We don't use that type of stock in Korean cooking. Like
Right.
our stock is you know, based on anchovies and seaweed and, you know, dried shiitake mushrooms and stuff. So like our fundamental stock is different, you know. So the ingredients that we use are different. Like fermentation is a much bigger thing in Korean cooking. There's like no fermentation in French cooking, you know.
Right.
So it is a very different discipline. You know, I wouldn't say I'm poking holes in it, but I would say that there are times when I definitely use French technique sometimes in some Korean cooking and you know, I'll you know, kind of fuse the two together. But it's just a different approach to cooking, which works in the Western world a bit more, where you know, there it's the land of butter and cheese and cream. You know, like we don't have these things in Asia. Like there's
Right.
no, it's actually naturally dairy free. You know,
Right.
historically. You know? So it's a very different approach to cuisine and a different kind of fundamental basic structure to it. So like if you were to study, I actually, like, you know, everything kind of comes out of China in Asia, because it was, you know, that's kind of, so I think like the fundamentals of Chinese cuisine and all of that kind of, and then it spread around Asia, kind of evolved and became, you know, different. And every country kind of became unique. But I think that the mother cuisine is probably Chinese cuisine
Cool.
in Asia.
That's
Yeah.
so cool. And I'm just thinking back, or I would like for you to think back for us about your parents and your family. And sort of growing up in your home, I assume your parents taught you how to cook or you learned under their supervision, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to know, like, how do they react to you going to get a formal education in cooking? And I'm sure they were like, we taught you how to cook. You've been cooking with us for like X amount of years. Like, why are you paying to go learn how to cook? Like, was I a
Yeah.
bad teacher?
No, I don't think, because they knew, like they kind of knew it was a different thing, you
Yeah.
know, like, and also I was doing pastry and like we never, like I don't think my mom used the oven to make desserts at all ever, you know.
Yeah.
And you can see that, like, you know, in Korea, like desserts are not really baked, like
Right.
you don't really kind of bake cakes and things because there's no butter, we didn't have like these like things, and desserts were mostly kind of pan fried or steamed or things. And you find this in most of Asia. I mean, there are exceptions, but so she understood I was doing something different. And also, like, I think it's one thing to learn to cook at home and another thing to actually learn to cook and take it as and to take it as a career
Right.
path,
Right.
so I think that they kind of understood that. Yeah. Like they never thought that it wasn't even in their vocabulary for me to become a chef, it wasn't something they had planned for me
Absolutely. You
necessarily.
you'd
Yeah.
mentioned a couple times previously, sort of like particularly in Asian cuisine, like, unlike Western cuisine, there's not as heavy reliance, I should say, on dairy and egg and or maybe an egg, but like
Well, there's
butter. Yeah,
eggs, but
right,
there's no
right,
like
right.
butter,
Like
cream, and
butter, cream,
cheese.
and cheese, right? So I know that you've said in the past in other engagements, sort of that you've been able to sort of connect and think about the history of a place and sort of the experiences of a place based on things like the food, right? Like things
Yeah.
that they have, they don't have, or whatever. And so I'm curious to just know in your experience in your career, sort of what are some of the most poignant narratives, historical narratives you've learned or discovered through food and cultures that maybe were not your own, right? Throughout your travels in the world.
Yeah. I mean, food tells the history of a culture and a country. It tells the story of war, feast, famine, occupation,
Right.
recession, everything, And Korea is a classic example of that. Korea is quite a war-torn country. And there are certain things in Korea that are still popular to this day because of the GI presence and because of the war, like Spam and the history and the tradition of tinned meats. Korea loves Spam to this day. It's considered a luxury item.
Mm,
And that's because of the presence of GIs. And, what Korea was an extremely poor country during the war, and the army rations were traded like gold. And
right.
so Spam was considered, if you got your hands on a can of Spam, you were like, it was like gold. And to this day, Spam still has that like cachet of being a luxury item and is given as gifts. And so anywhere you go to these countries or places where there's a history of an army base, it's same with Hawaii.
Yeah.
Spam is a thing there. Okinawa, it's the same thing. So these foods have kind of they'll creep their way into the local community and they'll evolve and and they'll adapt and they'll become uniquely Koreified or whatever to the local palate. And yeah, so it's an interesting thing to look at a country and to understand the culture through the lens of food. And I think that every country has that. I mean, there's Spanish influence of food in the Philippines. There's, Dutch influence in Indonesia and vice versa. And to this day, there's great Vietnamese food in Paris,
Yep.
so and there's great Indian food here in London.
Of
And so,
course.
this all has to do with, kind of colonization, occupation, like all of this stuff. And so, and the spice route, trade of not only spices, but also ideas and it influences culture tremendously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so funny you brought up Spam. First of all, I shouldn't say I grew up on Spam, but I ate Spam sort of as a novelty growing up. I think for my parents, it was definitely more of a necessity when they were growing up. They didn't have much, but I think for me, it was sort of like a novelty that I was trying, and it was very fun. I liked it. I haven't eaten in a long time, but in this vein of sort of history in food, it's funny because in some regards, I think people are of two minds. So I'm thinking of my own cultural background. Like my parents grew up in the South; they're Black. And so they ate chitlins or chitterlings, whatever people call them, as
Mhm.
a necessity, right? They were given the lowest part of the pork, and that was the chitterlings, and that's what they ate, right? And so, of course, now for a whole host of reasons that are positive, like people don't have to eat chitlins if they don't want to, right? But I think my parents
Yeah.
still have this nostalgia and they want to eat it. But I do know there are peers of mine and other folks who are maybe contemporaries of mine who actively like, they don't want to reclaim it as a thing. They actually want us to like move away from these slave foods, right? They don't want to continue to bring along the history of what came to us, quote unquote, in a very sort of traumatic or deficit based way. And so I'm curious to
Yeah.
know in this paradigm how you think
Mm.
about some of the foods that you've just mentioned, right? Like some of the,
Yeah.
or like, is there a role for us sort of abandoning these things that it came from influences that were negative and saying like, we're beyond that, let's go somewhere else?
I mean, Korea has a dish called budae-jjigae, which
Mm,
literally translates to army barrack stew.
mm,
And they ate it in poor times because it was out of necessity. But now Koreans enjoy it, and it's on menus everywhere because they love it.
Yeah.
Literally. And it's full of all this random stuff like Vienna sausages, hot dogs, baked beans, American cheese, like 5 different kinds of noodles, like
Right.
macaroni. It's literally army barrack ration stew, and it's in a spicy broth.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I love it. It tastes so good. And there are restaurants that specialize in just this one stew.
Yeah.
And I think it is a nod to our history. It happened, and it was a necessity to eat this when Korea was extremely poor, and Korea is not a poor country anymore,
Yeah.
but people still love to eat it. And so I don't particularly have that notion that you have to ban it. I mean, I'm kind of like, if people like it and people like to eat it,
Serve it.
serve it. Like, why not?
Right.
And I think that a lot of these kind of like cheap foods are kind of having a resurgence right now, because particularly a lot of them were plant-based, so things like breadfruit, or, that were considered like high in starch and high in calories, and just were basically grown to feed slaves. Like, you're seeing people, make like breadfruit in so many in chilies and everything, because it is plant-based, and it's such a great substitute for meat. And so you're starting to see some of these vegetables which were, I guess, like kind of grown for crops for slaves that are kind of coming back
Yeah.
right now. So it's interesting to see.
Yeah.
I don't know if you kind of should ban all
Yeah,
of
yeah.
these foods, but because I think that kind of different foods like fall into favor and fall out of favor, like over time, and whatever's trendy. And it's interesting to kind of see.
The resurgence
Yeah.
of certain food you mentioned is so funny. I remember it must have been 20, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 years ago. I don't remember. There was this viral Twitter moment because Neiman Marcus in their holiday catalog was selling a number of things. They sold items, but they also sold some food products, which I didn't know that was part of their catalog, but fine. But they were selling like some collard green, like pre-cooked like collard greens or whatever. And it was like the funniest thing to me because they were like selling these collard greens. They're cooked in bacon or whatever. And I think like, I don't know the quantity, but like it was like $66 plus shipping for some collard greens. And so of course, like my family and I are like, are you kidding? Like, do you know how many
Yeah,
greens you can
exactly.
make and
Yeah.
buy with $66 of greens, right? But I think it, like,
Yeah.
to your point, had become like an in vogue thing in a way that it had not been in generations before. But for the reasons you articulated, whether it's plant-based or sustainable or whatever it might be, right? It was becoming more mainstream in ways that it just had not been. And I think I like that
Absolutely.
personally, but I also think what's nerve-wracking is sometimes that doesn't actually come with the history of the food, right? Like you have this resurgence, but it doesn't come with the story. It doesn't come with all the things that you would hope
Mhm.
come with that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Oh,
My father, he refuses to eat brown rice or any other kind of multigrain rice, even though now brown rice, multigrain rice is more expensive than white rice, because growing up, white rice was for all of the rich people,
right.
and he can never eat white rice because
Right.
his family didn't have enough money. And so now he thinks it's hysterical that you pay premium for this like cheap brown rice.
Yep. I have a super odd thing to say that's not actually part of the podcast, but the building we're in is having a fire alarm that I hear is actually a real fire alarm.
Oh gosh.
Um,
Okay.
so
Right.
I'm
So you
going
have
to
to go.
need to go. We certainly, I don't know how long this will last. So if it lasts
Okay.
for 5, 7 minutes, then we can get back on the line or something like that. But let me get out the building. I'll take my phone with me so I can contact you or Tara or others, just in
Okay.
terms of
Yeah.
like how
Okay.
soon,
Perfect.
we can get back on maybe in 10 minutes. I don't know, but I'll
Okay.
communicate with them.
All
I'm
right.
so sorry.
Well,
This
get
is
safe.
awful.
Yeah. Go to your safety zone.
All right. I'll see you in a second. Bye.
Okay.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Conversations at the Salt Line. I'm your host, Wesley Dixon, and we are here for part 2 of our conversation with Judy Ju. How are you, Judy?
I'm good. How are you? Did you
I'm-
survive?
I did survive. For those who were listening, we had to sort of bifurcate this part of the podcast because last time there was a fire alarm going off. And so we had to quickly sort of shut down the set, stop our conversation, and go to safety, quote unquote. But we are back now and ready to go. Actually, it's funny, Judy. When it happened, it reminded me of one of my favorite episodes of one of my favorite shows, which is A Different World. I'm not sure if you ever watched that back in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, it's the Cosby Show spinoff. So it's when Denise Huxtable went to college, and then it went from there. But in one of the episodes, in one of the later seasons, Jada Pinkett, now Jada Pinkett Smith, was acting on the show, and she was a college student. And the story was she was like this lower income student from Baltimore and had to make money while she was at school to pay for her tuition. And so she would sort of cook in her dorm room and have these big sort of vats of whatever it was, gumbo or beans, something really good, better than the college food. And so of course, like the circuit protector in the dorm room could not support this sort of industrial cooking. And so of course at one point, like she was cooking, she left something on the stove or on the hot plate and like shut out the whole power for the whole building. And then it was sort of a mystery of sort of like what was happening. And of course, the story why it happened. But of course it was like sort of punitively handled originally. But then of course the story is like there's insights on like what it's like for students who don't have financial means to be at school and they have to make money other ways. And so there was sort of a larger story around that instance. But it reminded me of that incident, or it was sort of like a college fire alarm going off. You don't know why, and you sort of learn from it. But here we are back in our conversation.
Perfect.
Yes. So I think the last thing we talked about before we had our fire was we were sharing our respective spam stories. But of course that was fun. But I think the larger concept was, like with history and war and things come these really unique food cultures in different places that sort of unite people in different ways. So I know one of the things that you are incredibly passionate about and we're super excited about is the concept of fusion food and sort of how fusion foods come to be, what they represent. And so I would love to sort of hear from you how fusion food has sort of developed as sort of a professional and personal passion of yours and how that shows up in your businesses and in your restaurants.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always say that today's invention is tomorrow's tradition, and with the world becoming smaller and smaller these days, and, people are traveling around so much, you have so many people of mixed race even, and cultures are blending all over the place. And, people are living on different continents and spending their childhood here, their, teenage years here and the college years here. Like you're going to have people who are globally connected and with deep roots on many different continents and with different cultures. I always describe myself as a French trained Korean American Londoner, and so I've got a solid footprint in Asia, America and in Europe. And so it's, for me, it's very natural to blend all of these influences together. And particularly, growing up in America, this like whole Korean American cuisine is very different in the same way that Chinese American cuisine is not something that you can get in China at all. Like you can't get egg foo young or beef with broccoli or lo mein or egg rolls or any of this stuff. And I didn't even realize that until I went to China. Like none of this stuff exists there, And I think that's something that's quite natural that happens, and like different ethnic communities, whenever they migrate or ethnic enclaves happen, it's just, like they take something local and they blend it with their own culture. And it's a natural progression in the same way language changes and progresses and evolves and is quite dynamic. I think the more people travel and the smaller, honestly, that the world becomes, the more we're going to see this type of fusion cuisine. And, and Korean fried chicken is a classic example of that as well, something that was brought over to Korea through the American influence and the GIs and all that stuff, and was adopted by the Koreans, evolved, became uniquely Korean and then boomeranged back to the States and to the Western world as its own unique product.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to go back to the Korean fried chicken example in particular in a moment. But before we leave that, I am curious, as I hear you talk about fusion food and as I reflect on my own enjoyment of fusion food, I'm also, I have to admit that I'm a little concerned in some ways because I worry about the potential for sort of erasure of sort of particular parts of the original sort of culture or heritage that contributed to the fusion food too, right? So I'm wondering if you've sort of seen or experienced or have thoughts about how we can sort of protect some of the key parts of different food cultures as we also allow them to naturally evolve and metamorphosize into what is, as you said, fusion food.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Korean fried chicken, it came from Southern American fried chicken, like National
Right.
Fried Chicken. So that still very much is a thing.
Right.
It's not erased, or I don't even think hurt the Southern Fried Chicken history of it, or tradition of it at all. It's only evolved and become a derivative of it.
Right.
So I think in that case it's just kind of become a different product, and it is just related to that. I think that in some cases, whether or not I guess kind of like a different example of what I kind of see happening here is like people are just making Korean fried chicken and nothing about it tastes Korean.
Right.
And so, like they're not using correct ingredients or whatever. They're really just kind of slapping the label Korean on it because it's trendy.
Yes.
And I think although I love the idea of everybody jumping on the Korean bandwagon and, people wanting to have a taste and to spread Korean flavors around, I would like for there to be some authenticity, even if it's just one ingredient, you know what I mean? For there to be like the gochujang paste is there at least, or the gochugaru is there at least, and so because I think that without that, it kind of just becomes a label without any of the real substance underneath it,
Of course.
Yeah,
it's sort
so
of
that's kind of
it's sort of a gilded age of food, so to speak, right? It has like this
exactly.
nice veneer of it having, what to your point, this sort of trendy, globalized sort of moniker, but underneath it, there's no real substance. So it seems like a very simple thing. What's funny about this is, so I'm dating myself and sort of embarrassing myself when you're talking about sort of like the Southern American fried chicken being the base of what then evolved into Korean fried chicken. It reminds me of the fact that like I feel like monthly, or at least like semi-annually, I learn of a song that is actually a cover or a sample of an original song from like 3 or 4 decades ago, and I had no clue that had the history it had, right? And so this seems like a very similar thing where like it's one, exciting because there's opportunities for you to be educated and to learn about the history of something, but you have to also make sure that you are putting yourself in a space where you are learning the history, right? I mean, it's one thing to sort of not, I guess what I'm saying is, as you're picking up, is sort of like the importance of this is to make sure that even if things change, we still sort of give deference to whatever original history sort of helped us get there, so that we don't sort of be fully ignorant of what we're engaging in, eating, listening to, all that.
Absolutely. I think it's important to give that nod
Yes.
and that acknowledgement, and of where it's come from and the history.
Yeah, I have to admit, and I promise we will get back to fried chicken in a second, but I have another thought on this topic, which is I have to admit that as we're talking about sort of the globalization of food of all kinds and sort of slapping of sort of labels on it, like Korean on fried chicken without much of the substance, it does make me think of personally how I have come to understand the globalization of Korean food. And fair to say, it might be wrong, right? It might be horrible, but I have come to see it beyond just through Korean fried chicken, but also in like mukbang, right? Like I see this is a very particular like exportation of Korean culture, and I'm curious where you sort of place that on the spectrum of like authenticity, excitement about it, frustration with it. Like how do you sort of understand or reflect on mukbang as a food phenomenon globally?
I mean, I don't particularly understand mukbang. Like this kind of like whole voyeuristic fetish thing, but whatever floats your boat is absolutely fine.
Right.
Like I that's a new thing. Like that's not something that like my parents grew up watching, or my grandparents grew up watching. So that's very much a new trendy type of voyeuristic, eating thing. But I think it's the whole thing of like the unwrapping of the unpacking of things. Like people love watching gifts just getting unpacked and things, or people love watching zits get popped, or like blackheads getting come out. You know what I mean? It's that whole kind of voyeuristic kind of
like a
culture.
Demystification of some things in some ways too, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think that the mukbang, because they eat everything. It's not just Korean food. They're eating hot dogs, hamburgers, pizza, like, everything under the sun, and just gorging themselves. So, and there isn't any dialogue or anything in terms of educating the
Right.
viewer as to what they're eating, you know?
Right.
So when I've seen these videos, it really is just about watching somebody stuff their face in the same way, you know, when you're watching somebody like unpack something, they're not necessarily getting into the details of what they're
Right.
unpacking. You know, it's kind of just this pure visual stimulation.
Right. Right. And I will
something.
say,
So-
and again, as a non-Korean, my opinion probably means very little on this, but I will say, mukbang, as odd as it is, I think it's actually very cringy to watch, me personally, but
Yeah,
it
I
does
do-
like
yeah.
open the door for my curiosity around other kinds of Korean food experiences, right? So I do think it pushes me
Yeah.
in some odd circuitous route to like learn about, I shouldn't say legitimate Korean food, but like, you know, other more thoughtful or educational things. So I think with whatever risks come with it and lack of comfort, I do think that ultimately I get to a decent place where that projection of globalization does bring me in, and then I stay. Everyone else may not stay, but I at least do stay on the journey and sort of continue to look at and read about and watch videos about Korean food. So it might be a
Yeah.
net positive. Who knows?
Yeah.
So back to chicken. So, you know, I don't know how engaged you are in social media, and you might be like above all this like very pedestrian stuff. But a few weeks ago when we were first interviewing, the day before, 2 days before, it had just gone viral that Paula Patton had sort of made this fried chicken on the internet, and she got a lot of criticism for how she made it. Have you seen this video before or no?
I have not. No.
Okay, so I will describe it to you in a second, but before, I don't want to bias you. So before I describe how she does hers, I want to ask you how you do your fried chicken from soup to nuts. Like you take it out of the
Okay.
package, and then what do you do after that?
Okay. So obviously we're sourcing a really good high quality chicken.
Yep.
I mean, like for the most part, when I'm at home, I'll just use chicken thighs, you know. But
I
best
love
quality,
chicken thighs, by the
Yeah,
way.
chicken
And
thighs
can
are
I just
best.
pause you, because I used to get so much slack for that because I thought chicken thighs were the best. They were like the naturally like
Tasty.
juiciest. Yes, exactly. And breast used to always be sort of creme de la creme, but I thought they were so dry and so
So dry.
pale. And so I
Yeah,
always loved
flavorless.
we're on the
Yeah,
same page. I'm happy about that. Okay, so you have
absolutely.
thighs, open them up, and then what?
Definitely. So I would buy. Okay. So at home, I like the bone in.
Okay.
In the restaurants, we do boneless because people prefer boneless, and we do a lot of chicken sandwiches,
Yeah.
right? So etc.
Yeah.
For Korean fried chicken, we do skinless as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
Okay, which is some places swear by the skin. We do skinless.
Okay.
Then we brine it. So we do like a soy sauce based brine. So you get the salt, you get the umami. We
Right.
put some lemon in there, a whole smattering of different spices and aromatics. So let that sit for 24 hours, get all that
Okay.
flavor in there, right?
Cool.
And get that salt in there so it's juicy.
Cool.
Then we take them out of the brine, rinse. You don't really have to rinse it, but just kind of get all the spices off because there's some peppercorns in there and some things. So just kind of get all of the hard spices off, and then dry it off, and then we put it in a pre-coat. And the pre-coat is a combination of corn flour, some salt, a little bit of baking soda, a little bit of pepper as well. And then we let that dry out, so it's dry on racks. And then we have a wet batter. And then people are of two thoughts of either wet or dry batter. We do a wet batter just because I think it just gets extra crispy and crunchy that way. You got kind of that hard shell that Korean fried chicken is most known for. Now, a lot of places in Korea do a dry batter because it's easier to do a dry batter, particularly when you're cooking in stores. But I personally love a wet batter. It is more fiddly, and it's a little bit harder, particularly when you're cooking a lot.
Yep.
But I swear by a wet batter, and that wet batter is going to have a whole different different types of flour: potato flour, corn flour,
Oh, wow.
regular flour, onion powder, garlic powder, some other spices, bit of baking soda to get all that bubbles in there.
Right.
And then we do, depending, but usually a combination of water and vodka, sometimes a little bit of beer or some
Vodka.
water.
Oh my
Vodka.
goodness. Heard it here
Yeah,
first.
so
I did not
vodka.
know that.
So vodka is flavorless, but any alcohol that is 40% or above prevents gluten development.
Okay.
And in this case, when it comes to fried chicken, you don't want chewy crust. You want crispy, light,
Right.
airy crust. So, gluten is a protein, and that's kind of
Right.
what you use. You have to activate the gluten when you make something like bread, because you
Right.
want that chewy, toothsome texture, not with fried chicken, right?
Okay.
And so, and you also want a bit of bubbles. So if you use a bit of beer, a bit of seltzer water, it's kind of like tempura. Those bubbles kind of help, and a
And this
little
would
bit
be
of water.
and this would be a benefit of a wet batter as opposed to a dry batter, because obviously in a dry batter you wouldn't be able to add vodka in the same way that
Exactly.
you would. Okay,
Exactly.
got it.
Exactly. And
Cool.
also this, sorry, there's some construction next door. I don't
No
know if you can
worries.
hear
Yeah,
that.
it's
No,
cool.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. But there's a dry, like that wet batter kind of gives it that like crispy crack versus just a crunchy, like, batter that is full of like nooks and crannies, like a dry batter. The
Yeah.
wet batter gives you that like crispiness
Yeah.
that you can't get from a dry batter. That's more full
Yeah.
of like crunch. I guess it's a little bit different between crunch versus crispy.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And then, so then we make that wet batter, and it has to be kind of quite thin. It's the consistency of paint. Dip it in, and then you hold it in the hot oil, and we do it at a lower temperature first, and then fry it off just until it's just cooked, and then let it rest. We take it out, and then just before serving, we do a quick flash fry.
Cool.
Crisp on a higher temperature, crisp up the outside, get it that nice golden brown. And then take it out and then serve it with, or toss it in those like great, like Korean umami filled, sauces like the gochujang, or sweet like chili, ginger, garlic, soy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love that. It's so funny because, of course, cooking is obviously a science and it's not an easy thing to do. But I think people hear of things like fried chicken or other things that are fried, for example, and assume, oh, it's like, pedestrian food. There's like, it's just too super casual. There's nothing hard about it. But obviously, per your explanation, like there's a lot of thought that goes into cooking, even fried food, or especially fried food, right? And so,
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of science in any type of cooking. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, particularly in my opinion, for what it's worth, I think foods that often come from heritages or cultures that had, I don't know, some trauma behind them, for example, right? Like these Southern foods, other kinds of things that might have been born out of lack or whatever, I think are often seen as sort of less meaningful and less valuable, right? And less stoked in things like science, right? But of course, it's just not true. And I think you have proven through this explanation that like fried chicken is a very hard thing to make. It's a very good thing to make, but like it's a very technical process, right? It's not a casual thing. So let me tell you what Paula Patton did. And I, like her, this is not sort of a dig at her, but it is generally known that her chicken making process was subpar. So she opened up the chicken from the package. She did not use thighs. I think she used wings, which was fine because I like wings too. Now a big point of debate was she did not wash them. And I know this is a very large, point of contention. The American CDC says you don't really have to wash. Actually, you probably shouldn't wash your meat because you're like splattering bacteria everywhere. I grew up washing my meat with vinegar, like a lime or lemon juice and water, but I can take or leave that part. So she didn't wash her meat. She then put them in flour. She did.
So no brine.
So no brine. Okay. She also did not season, at this point, did not season the flour nor the chicken directly, which was different for me. Your face is so funny. So it was different for me. She then put them, she pan fried them. So put them in the grease, covered in just raw flour, but no seasoning. And this is the part that was distinctly different from anything I've ever seen in my entire life. She then seasoned them while they were in the grease, right? So she sort of seasoned I know your face should be like on a t-shirt. Yeah, she seasoned the oil. So it's funny, the commenter who I watched review this video was like, you're seasoning grease, which is what she was doing, right? Like she was putting the seasoning on the grease, and then she of course had to flip them over because she had to sort of season both sides in this odd way. Now, to her credit, she says they tasted very good. It was her mother's recipe. It's very important to her. So, I'm not going to entirely trash it. But I saw this video and was like, oh my goodness, what is she doing? I was like, what is she doing? I've never seen this before. But it created for a viral Twitter moment, which maybe is what she wanted to begin with. I don't know. But that was her chicken making process. Your reaction says it all.
Well, I mean, you know what? The thing is, though, is that our parents and grandparents did things in a way that they just did them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's and sometimes like we have no explanation for it, you know,
Right.
like my girlfriend, she used to pan fry. I mean, she would get a whole fish and you know, just to pan fry a whole fish, which is fine. It's been gutted fillet, which you can
Right.
do. She can coat in flour, and then she cut off the tail in this really weird way. You know, I was like, why don't you just pan fry the whole? You know what I mean? And she's like, this is the way my mom did it, and so I was like, okay, that's just a bit weird because like when you present the fish and like the tail's missing, which is like
Right.
a bit of an odd. So then she asked her mom why she did this. Right. And then and she's like, well, because my frying pan wasn't big enough.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So here's my girlfriend doing this who has a big enough frying pan,
Right.
but had no idea why her mother did this.
Right.
And just thought it was just the way her mom did it because not because it made the fish taste better or whatever, simply because she had too small of a frying pan.
Absolutely.
Pan fry the fish. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
so sometimes the explanations are just that simple.
Right.
You know what I mean? As to like maybe you know, like, and a lot of times, you know, in the past, like people would shallow fry because they didn't have enough
Right.
oil to deep fry. So shallow frying is perfectly acceptable in a cast iron pan. Cast iron pan has a lot of seasoning in
Of
it.
course.
You know, it doesn't stick. But you know, like maybe there was like a shortage of salt, and so they didn't feel like they could salt the meat. I have no idea.
Absolutely.
You know?
No, absolutely. It's so
Yeah. So it's kind of like these little habits that our grandparents or our parents had for whatever reason. Like you can't explain them, and if it tastes good, fine. But I think that you know, as we inherit recipes, like we can enhance them or make them better in our way of making it better. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's better, you know, but it just becomes more signaturely ours, I guess, you know, because I get recipes that my mom gives me. And in the past, you know, like Korea, they used to always wash their meat
right.
because meat wasn't good quality. And they used to do a pre-boil to get rid of all of like the blood in the meat.
Right.
And then get rid and just drain
Like
all
dump
of that,
out, right.
that, you know what I mean? And dump out that first boil. And then
Right.
for me now, I'm like, that's all great flavor you're losing.
Right.
You
And
know,
maybe
and so
yeah, and maybe I've inherited that same sort of history unknowingly from my parents and my grandparents too, right? Where they were growing up, as we said, in rural Mississippi. And so maybe they weren't getting good quality, quote unquote, meat. And so they just had to, out of protection, boil it or otherwise clean it in a way that now we feel like isn't necessary. But I would know that, right? And so I think what's so exciting about you sort of sharing these thoughts to me is that at Vassar, we have this sort of phrase that's sort of called go to the source. And I think it sort of course, is a nod towards the importance of like primary research, like history, all those sorts of things. And I think food is such a great entry point into encouraging someone to go to the source and figure out their heritage, their familial, their whatever kind of history and story they want to learn or tell. I think food is a very accessible and very emotionally like exciting entry point for those stories.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, food is so highly emotive, you know. I don't know if you remember watching that Disney film Ratatouille with the
Yeah.
I mean, there's one scene in there where that, you know, kind of like evil, like spindly food critic, you know, he has the first bite of Ratatouille and then like
Right.
immediately in that first bite, he's taken back and transported to when he was a little boy crying with like a skinned knee and he's bleeding and his mom just scoops him up and he has a bite of ratatouille and it makes all of his tears and all of his problems disappear.
Right.
You know, and that's what food does for us, you know,
Right.
like smells and tastes. They immediately bring back this rush of memories from our childhood, from a beautiful moment to, you know, like monumental milestone memories, like a wedding, a birth, a death, anything, you know,
Right.
that's something that you associate this particular food with always and makes you think of that, or a person.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Well, at the last part of our podcast, we have a segment called sort of a Vassar Hot Seat, which are questions that our students have submitted for you because they're great, thoughtful students. And so some are like really simple, some might be more thoughtful, but I have 5 questions to ask and then we'll wrap it up, okay? How does that sound?
Yeah, that's
okay,
great.
Perfect. So the first question is, what is the best and worst dish you've had to try on TV?
Oh gosh. Okay. So the best dish, I mean, generally whenever I judge Iron Chef, it's like amazing cooking,
Right.
like amazing,
Right.
you know, like the highest level, the best quality, you know,
Right.
they're all like very well-renowned chefs
Right.
and you know, Michelin starred, all of that stuff. So I can't remember one in particular, but I've had some pretty amazing food on that show. But they're using fantastic ingredients too,
Right,
you know,
right.
Wagyu beef and caviar, all this stuff. And,
Right.
some of the worst food on TV, you know, I'd have to say that like some of these game show formats have things like where you know, like they make like a challenge and it's like tin can slam or frozen food feud, and the only thing that the contestant is allowed to use are like tinned meats,
Right.
tinned everything they can't, or like all frozen stuff. Frozen is better, but
Right.
like, you know, or sometimes they have to pick something out of a or mystery basket, and they get like Skittles, and they have to cook an entire meal with Skittles. You know what
You're
I
like,
mean?
what
It's
is
stuff like
this?
this.
Right.
It's all of that like weird stuff that
Right.
can get quite challenging.
Right.
Yeah.
I hear you. Okay. The second question is, what is your most memorable travel story from your Savour days?
Oh, Savour. A travel story. Gosh, you know what? I would have to say, I was working on this. I loved working at that magazine. So
Yeah.
thank you for that question. It was truly back then. It was like, you know, when Coleman Andrews, who was the founder and he was the editor in chief back then, it was truly like the National Geographic of food, you know, and they really did explore cultures through that lens of food. And I found it so incredibly interesting. And there was one story in particular that I remember to this day, and it was about this small town in Italy, and it was I think it was just outside. It was in Genova, but it was the small little town, and there was this confectionery store that had been open for like 100 years, and a lot of it was based on this old, like, you know, great grandmother, some kind of matriarch's recipes.
Right.
And, you know, and they went there and they interviewed the family who had been running this confectionery store for like generations and generations. And they found like the last living grandmother, and they, you know, got some of her favorite recipes that were actually not sold in the store, you know, and they were literally written on a napkin in like Italian, like this scrawl. And I got this like scrawl, and, you know, it was everything from like budinos to like these small little canestrelli almond cookies that were flavored with like rose blossom water.
Oh, wow.
And you know, it was I think the store was called Romanesco or Roman. I can't remember exactly the name of the store, but it was such a cute and endearing like family business with generations and cookies and confectionery and candied fruit. That was the thing that they're most known for, and trying to recreate these heirloom like recipes for their domestic kitchen, for the American kitchen, using you know, tablespoons and American ingredients was quite challenging. I remember I made this one little stupid cookie like literally like, you know, 60 times trying to get this right and the texture right and everything. So yeah, that was one of my favorite stories.
Oh, I love that story. It's so funny because just back from my own memory, my mom has like a drawer at the house of, to your point, like I think it is some napkins, some index cards, some postcards, like some printed paper of just things scribbled down of like these recipes, and I'm like, I have no clue what you've written down here. I don't even know what dish this is for. It's not even labeled, but for her it's like perfect, right? It's exactly what to do with it. It's meaningful for her. So I hear you on that. This is a different kind of a question, but one of our students has asked for any advice or words of wisdom you might have for folks considering a major career change. I know you've made some yourself, so anything you can share could be super helpful.
I think, I mean, this is kind of like general advice, but just don't quit and be prepared for failure. You know, it's not easy, but And I don't think that, you know, any career is easy. You're always going to be confronted with failure all the time, but particularly when you're doing a career switch and possibly, you know, later in your age and whatever, it's extremely frustrating at first, you know, and you kind of wonder like why things are not happening as quickly, or you know, why did this happen when it should have been like this or whatever. And I think that there is no set clear path, and you kind of have to make it up as you go along, because you are going to be tossed so many curveballs,
Right.
and so many obstacles that you're going to have to forge your own path. And particularly as an entrepreneur, and it's, you know, it's like, it's so incredibly challenging in so many different ways. Don't get frustrated when you are derailed, because that path that you thought you had in your mind might not have been the right path for you. And because an obstacle comes in your way and you have to divert, that's probably maybe the path that you were supposed to be attended upon,
Right.
you know? And so don't get frustrated when things derail you or an obstacle or something, because you're going to get hundreds of those.
Right.
Because everything that you think can go wrong is going to go wrong.
Yep.
You know, and
Absolutely.
and just be prepared for it, you know, and embrace it. And it's going to be hard. Like, you can't plan life,
Right.
you know, and you can't plan what it's going to be like when you embark upon a totally different career that you don't really know a lot about. And, you know, you're going into it and you know, you're a bit older, and you're a minority, or you're female on top of it, and whatever, and you're forging new territory. It is just full of treachery, you know what I mean? But you just, if you believe in yourself and you believe in your product, or you believe in your services, whatever you're doing, if you want, you know, whatever you're trying to sell, your output, like, you will get there. And don't let your belief you know, ever be deterred, because if you know that you're good, you know that your product's good, you know that you're talented, like, you will get there in the end.
It's amazing
And
advice.
I would say that another good word of advice, because I see a lot of people who make this mistake, is be kind and nice and grateful to everyone that helps you along that way, because you're going to need so much advice, so much help. People are going to open doors for you. Always say thank you and be grateful. And you see the same people on the way up as you do on the way down.
Yeah.
And never forget to be humble and have that gratitude.
I think those are all amazing pieces of advice for our students, but for anyone. So thank you so much for sharing. Just two more quick questions. The penultimate one is, what are the one or two spices that we will always find in your cabinet or in your purse?
Oh gosh. In my cabinet, I always have gochujang.
Okay.
In my purse, just because they make those little minis, the Tabasco minis.
Yes, of course. They're so helpful.
I've never to bring those on the plane because they fit in the 100 mils, and plane food is always like bland.
Yes.
You know, a bit of Tabasco is always great.
Absolutely. I just came back from New Orleans a couple of days ago, and there was like not Tabasco, but Crystal everywhere. And it was just helpful for all the food. It was seasoned well, but it was still a good addition to all the food I was having. And the last question is, what is your Soulbird order? For those who don't know, Soulbird is Judy's restaurant or there's two of them, but one of her restaurants in London. And so people want to know what you order at your own restaurant.
Oh gosh, I can't eat fried chicken every day.
Okay.
So I will obviously have a bite just to test it. But my go-to, which is a bit healthier, is the grilled chicken.
Okay.
On salad. So we have salad bowls or rice bowl, but I'll do it on salad. And it's
Okay.
kind of like a bibimbap. So all those different types of pickles on it, and like a musangchae, which is a type of kind of radish pickle, and, you know, red onion, and really nice, crisp, fresh iceberg lettuce and stuff like
Right.
that, with your gochujang sauce, and you mix it all up like a bibimbap. Yeah, but it's salad based. So it is much healthier, and my healthy option that I have, yeah, whenever I'm there.
I love that. I'm coming to London in a few weeks. I will make sure to stop by
Oh,
and get someone. I am
yeah,
there.
actually, please look me up. Yeah, we can
Yes,
meet and I'll have you in
absolutely.
for lunch. No, I mean that. Please do.
I
Yeah,
will,
get in touch.
absolutely. I absolutely
Yeah,
will.
definitely.
Well,
Definitely.
wonderful. Well, Judy, thank you so much for making the time. This has been so fun. And for those at home, this has been Conversations at the Salt Line. And I heard a few salt lines, if you will. I heard the tension between authenticity and globalization. I also heard the tension between history and food, fusion food, and sort of the creation of new things that are born out of what could be some traumatic or difficult times. But ultimately, as we always like to promote at the Salt Line, beautiful things come from some friction, and food is no different. So thank you so much, Judy, for being here, and look forward to
Thank
seeing you in
you.
London soon.